All politics is identity politics. Hey guys, welcome to Identity Politics. I'm DeAnna. Let's cut the bullshit and get right into it. America and Israel, with some not-so-silent backing from the Gulf states, is at war with Iran. On paper, it's a pretty large group of countries mad at Tehran right now, but you're already seeing major anti-American demonstrations in places like Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet is stationed. This could go sideways very fast. Now, why are we at war with Iran? Well, we all know. Secretary of State Marco Rubio basically told us.
The United States conducted this operation with a very clear goal in mind. I haven't got a chance to see a lot of reporting. I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Now, you might be asking yourself, did he just say what I think he said? He did. You all saw that clip on X and wherever else yesterday. But this is American Renaissance. I want to be fair. I want to give you the full context. I don't want to just pull out the clickbait here. Far fewer saw what he also said immediately afterwards.
To prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life. No, let me two things I would say. Number one is, no matter what, ultimately this operation needed to happen. That's the question of why now. But this operation needed to happen because Iran in about a year or a year and a half would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles, so many drones, that no one could do anything about it because they could hold the whole world hostage. Look at the damage they're doing now. And this is a weakened Iran. Imagine a year from now.
Now, building up to something here, doing it by being very moderate and fair, perhaps overly so. Were we compelled to hit Iran simply because of Israel? Secretary Rubio says no. Not as clickbait friendly as the clip before, but he directly denies that. So, what does Israel have to do with it? The question that he was answering with that clip was not why, but why now? Basically, Israel was going to hit Iran, and then Iran would hit American assets in the region, and that would cause a lot of casualties. So, the thinking was if America and Israel hit Iran now, there will be fewer casualties. So that's the why right now. Now, it should be noted that as of this recording, at least 6 American servicemen are dead. Casualties among the Iranians, including obviously among their military and political leadership, are much, much higher. Now, it's not just the Secretary of State talking like this. This is Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. He's saying basically the same thing.
The most critical point is that this was a defensive measure, a defensive operation. And why is that? I took some notes, and this is not classified, so I'll tell you what I think is important. Israel was determined to act in their own defense here, with or without American support. Why? Because Israel faced what they deemed to be an existential threat. Iran was building missiles at a radical and a rapid clip to the point where our allies in the region could not keep up. As you know, Iran has long vowed to take out Israel, wipe it off the map, and they have long seen that as a critical threat to their very existence. Because Israel was determined to act with or without the U.S., our commander-in-chief and the administration and the officials I just named had a very difficult decision to make. They had to evaluate the threats to the U.S., to our troops, to our installations, to our assets in the region and beyond. And they determined, because of the exquisite intelligence that we had, that if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. We have troops in harm's way, and we have many Americans in the region, and that was of great concern. If we had waited for all of those eventualities to take place, the consequences of inaction on our part could have been devastating.
All right, then. The question is this. Why was it so important to hit Iran at all? Like, if one accepts that you have to do this now, given how you've been boxed in, why do you have to do it at all? And at some level, we all know, at least somewhat, all of us here have probably read the same posts, listened to the same takes. Maybe some of us have been talking about this issue for literally decades, but let's lay it out in normie terms, in Fox News conservative terms. Think this through a little bit differently from most of the content that we've probably been exposed to. First, Israel was going to hit Iran. No reason to doubt that. President Trump has said since 2015, 2016 that he would not let Iran get a nuclear weapon. We should note here that a lot of people who are saying things like, oh, Trump betrayed us, he's been pretty consistent on this. And frankly, if you're surprised by this, that's on us. There were people at the time, 2015, 2016, got gray in this beard, remember, I went through this, who were saying at the time, look, Donald Trump, look who his daughter married. Look at the people he's working with. Look at these statements he's made in the past. He's Zion Don. It's the same thing as usual. This was said by a lot of people at the time. If you were one of those guys back in the day saying Trump is just another neocon, just another tool of Israel, just another establishment guy or whatever, you can claim this. But I think a lot of people did not. And it's not that they didn't notice. I think people had their eyes open even at the time, even if they pretend they didn't now. Because most of what became the alt-right basically said, nope, we're going with this guy because he denounced Iraq, because he denounced nation building, because he had these other policies on trade and immigration and everything else, because, and maybe this isn't stated by people, but I think the thinking had a lot to do with it, because we're tired of being totally irrelevant to the political debate. A lot of people said, nope, whatever Ivanka converted to, we're going with this guy. And that's the coattails they rode. Donald Trump was not, and never pretended to be, Ron Paul. In fact, the very first thing that he did was basically sink Rand Paul's presidential run. And a lot of people should perhaps think about whether they were accepting him because of the promise of progress on issues like immigration, and less because foreign policy. Instead, they were hearing what they wanted to hear on foreign policy. I mean, even with Iraq, yeah, he opposed Iraq, he opposed Bush and everything else. But even with Iraq, his gripe was that we didn't take the oil. He was never a non-interventionist. Let's not lie to ourselves. But we'll come back to that. Right now, you have the Speaker of the House and the Secretary of State both saying, look, Israel was going to launch this attack. Our guys would get hit afterward. Therefore, let's join in and mitigate the damage. Now we get into the real issue. Let us remember, Israel, kind of an open secret, is a nuclear power. It has nuclear weapons. They kind of pretend they don't, but we all know they do. So Israel is not going to be wiped off the map, even if you have these huge attacks. They might get hit with missiles, Rubio saying, oh, Iran has all these things, but Israel has the nuclear bomb. So even if one were inclined to be deeply worried about the survival of the Jewish state, why is this our problem? Well, our bases are there. Oh, okay, well, that's a reasonable thing. Well, why do we have bases there? Presumably to protect access to the oil supplies and whatever else, and, though this is overlooked, a lot of the Sunni states, especially the Gulf states, are more or less American allies now, more or less Iranian enemies, more or less in a silent partnership with Israel, don't like Iran very much. This is especially true of Saudi Arabia. One thing that should be noted in passing here is that the bulk of the Muslim world, outside, of course, the Muslim diaspora populations in what used to be the West, is de facto on the side of America-Israel in this. Leave that aside for now. The question is this: what good are these bases if the bases are just a vulnerability? If the bases are, in fact, seemingly the only vulnerability here? In fact, we are told that most of these bases were basically evacuated before all this happened. So what's the point of having them? And furthermore, and more to the point, America is the superpower, right? We're the empire. We're sort of leaning into that these days. TikTok is filled with the slow motion Macarena vibe music with bald eagles and fighter jets staring down at everyone. We're the hegemon. We're the empire. This is who we are. And President Donald Trump can't tell Israel, well, just don't launch this attack. Like, this seems like a question that's not unreasonable to ask normal people to consider. And you could say, oh, well, Israel runs America. Okay, well, in June 2025, the Wall Street Journal reported that President Trump ordered Benjamin Netanyahu to turn planes on their way to strike Iran around in the air. And Netanyahu apparently obeyed. Now, was that just made up? Could have been. Certainly crazier things have happened. But Rubio also suggested that no, we were going to do it. We are going to attack Iran. But Israel more or less dictated the timing. Now, I'm not sure that's better, but fine. But the overall picture is still we have bases, and this is going off what they are saying publicly. This is based on the normal political take, not necessarily the kinds of takes that we're getting in our sphere. We have bases that we can't use and are seemingly just a vulnerability, and an ally, so-called, that can't fight for itself even though it's a nuclear power. Why not just let Israel attack and see if Iran does, in fact, want to strike America? Or if you do want to strike Iran anyway, let them make the first attack on the United States. That may sound a little cynical, but this is something that was publicly aired by at least some in the administration. This was really overlooked by a lot of people. Just a few days before this war started, Politico reported White House officials believe the politics are a lot better if Israel strikes Iran first. Now, really, the completion of that headline is, and then Iran strikes the United States. Quote, senior advisors to President Donald Trump would prefer Israel strike Iran before the United States launches an assault on the country, according to two people familiar with ongoing discussions. These Trump administration officials are privately arguing that an Israeli attack would trigger Iran to retaliate, helping muster support from American voters for a U.S. strike. The calculus is a political one, that more Americans would stomach a war with Iran if the United States or an ally were attacked first. Recent polling shows that Americans, and Republicans in particular, support regime change in Iran, but are unwilling to risk any U.S. casualties to achieve it. That means Trump's team is considering the optics of how an attack is conducted in addition to other justifications, such as Iran's nuclear program. There's thinking in and around the administration that the politics are a lot better if the Israelis go first and alone, and the Iranians retaliate against us and give us more reason to take action, said one of the people familiar with the discussions. Both individuals were granted anonymity to describe private conversations, so did these sources even exist? With hopes dimming in Washington for a diplomatic resolution to the standoff with Iran, the primary question is becoming when and how the U.S. attacks. Regardless of the desire for Israel to act first, the likeliest scenario may be a jointly launched U.S.-Israel operation, the two people said, unquote. Now, whenever you have these unnamed sources, I wonder whether they're even real, but those are pretty good sources, apparently. But the question has to be asked, why not just do that? Why not let Israel just go on its own and then America gets attacked, and then the rationale for doing all this seems a lot clearer to normal people. And yet, even there, it's taken for granted Israel just can't do it on its own. Like, we would still have to get involved somewhere. In a way, even that would still be Israel getting us into the war. They strike first. We get retaliated against. We somehow knew we were going to be retaliated against. Our leaders knew this would happen and didn't stop Israel. Essentially, you end up in the same place. Probably it would come off better politically, though more American soldiers would have died. The question is very simple. What are we getting out of all this? Even if one holds to the increasingly questionable doctrine, the leftover Cold War doctrine, that Israel is supposedly America's airstrip one in the Middle East, then why do we need bases there? What's the point of having a regional ally if we have to do everything directly anyways? As a matter of fact, we used to have a strong regional ally in the Middle East. That was the linchpin of American foreign policy. You know what that country was called? Iran. That was the country that Nixon was building up. But then we let the Shah get overthrown, and now we're here. We can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. Now again, President Trump has been very consistent on this. By the way, so have most of the Democrats. Up and down and left and right, we are told, of course, nobody wants to let Iran have a nuclear weapon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained it to the Fox News boomers last night.
The reason that we had to act now is because after we hit their nuclear sites and their ballistic missiles program, you'd think they learned a lesson. But they didn't, because they're unreformable. They're totally fanatic about this, about the goal of destroying America. So they started building new sites, new places, underground bunkers that would make their ballistic missile program and their atomic bomb programs immune within months. If no action was taken now, no action could be taken in the future. And then they could target America, they could blackmail America, they could threaten us and threaten everyone in between. So action had to be taken, and you needed a resolute president like Donald J. Trump to take that action.
Now, at the risk of being reckless here, why? Even assuming you, dear viewer, are passionately attached to the survival of the Jewish state, Israel has nukes. The USSR and the USA managed to keep from nuking each other. It seems unlikely that Iran simply wants to commit mutual suicide in the hope it'll bring back the 12th Imam and wherever their Shiite prophecy says. It seems more likely that the real purpose of securing a nuclear weapon is quite rational. It's to prevent regime change. Let us not forget what happened to Libya. Muammar Gaddafi, leader many Americans had strong and legitimate grievances against many decades, had something of a rapprochement with Europe and America, signed a deal in 2003. He gave up his nuclear weapons program. In fact, he was the guy preventing all these refugees from getting into Europe. But then, in 2011, the Obama administration, and let's admit it was mostly Europe that was pushing for this, but Obama went along with it, NATO overthrew Gaddafi. Gaddafi himself was basically lynched by a mob and killed in very horrific style. What was the lesson every government on earth took? You cannot trust a disarmament agreement with the United States of America because the USA will just overthrow you when it gets the chance. So, why is it surprising that Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon? They'd be crazy not to get a nuclear weapon. This is a very rational thing to do. It's not because they're crazy. And so really, when we talk about making sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon, and I'm not saying you or I necessarily care whether Iran gets nukes or not, but all the leaders of the Republican and Democratic parties, and it is both of them, for many years have been saying, this is a very big deal. We can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon, but we're not really talking about nukes. Everyone, including the Iranian leadership, knows what we're really talking about. We're talking about regime change. And of course, though the Trump administration has backed away from this somewhat, the U.S. government at the start of all this was calling on the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the Ayatollahs. So forget why now. Why is this happening at all? Why must Iran be struck? Because if they get a nuke, the regime cannot be overthrown. And Israel obviously wants to overthrow that regime, as do many in America, which brings us to Trump. For older Americans, the idea that Iran is some primordial foe, some primordial American enemy, this goes back for decades. This goes back a very, very long time.
Can we get rid of this Ayatollah t-shirt? Khomeini died years ago.
But Marge, it works on any Ayatollah. Ayatollah Nakhbada, Ayatollah Zahedi. Even as we speak, Ayatollah Razmara and his cadre of fanatics are consolidating their power.
Now, this is somewhat before my time, probably before yours as well. But most people do not change their opinions. They do not change their worldview. They do not change their whole idea of what the world is from their youth. Fundamentally, I always think of Trump as a creature of the 1980s, and you see it in a lot of his basic approach. He still cares about things like who Time magazine puts on the cover. He wants respect and attention from celebrities and mainstream pop culture institutions. He still fundamentally has this view of America in its Indian summer during the Reagan era. And that includes the view of Iran. You have the hostage crisis, which arguably put Reagan into office in 1980. And it also provoked a huge wave of patriotism. You had newspapers printing out flags for people to put in their windows and everything else. Like, think of how foreign that is to us. The country was a totally different place. It was an actual country, for one. In 1980, this country was 83% white. Can you imagine that? 83% white. And that was when the decline was well underway. So you automatically had this gut reaction from Americans. Our embassy was attacked. Our people are being detained by these Muslims. And by the way, you can take for granted that every Muslim is practically by definition a foreigner. And as for Israel, did you have the same sort of attitude toward that country during the Reagan era? Well, just consider what even a pro-Israel administration like Ronald Reagan's considered appropriate behavior. back to UN resolution condemning Israel for attacking an unfinished nuclear reactor in 1981, suspended the delivery of F-16s to Israel, sold AWACS to Saudi Arabia, which was considered an enemy country by Israel at the time, pressured to end the incursion into Lebanon. There was no contradiction between this independent stance, between any of this stuff, like wanting to go with Iran and not necessarily be joined at the hip to anyone else. And I'm not trying to defend Reagan here, but simply to show that even he had way more independence at a time when Israel was considered not just an ally, but an ally in the Cold War, where you really were just on one side or the other, and the calculation was a bit simpler. Now consider the situation. We are maybe 60% of the population, depending on how you define it, probably a lot less. The culture has basically been broken. The national identity has been broken in ways you couldn't have imagined in the 1980s. Like, you have people in Congress openly announcing they are more loyal to other countries than they are to here. There's no consensus about our most basic national symbols. We don't even have a national anthem anymore. We have to have a black national anthem too before the Super Bowl. You have entire states, and let's face it, the cities in the country that actually matter, essentially in a constant low-level insurrection against federal immigration law. Reagan has a lot to do with that, by the way. More broadly, you look at the population of these cities, of entire regions, they just have nothing to do with you. They aren't American. They know they're not American. They get elected to Congress because they aren't American. And yet we still kind of go through the motions of pretending we've got a country. But we don't. We're in a very desperate struggle here to retain what little we have. And this is the fundamental problem with our foreign policy right now. It's not just that we are not even really sovereign at this point, or at best compromised. It's that it's questionable if there's anything to be sovereign, if there's even a we anymore, except a mechanism, a machine, basically. Like, that's what the state is. We don't even know how to talk about ourselves as a we anymore. This is something I don't think President Trump quite gets. And it's not to say it's a moral fault, it's just a question of the time he's from. I have very little doubt that President Trump thinks he's ending an enemy that basically has been with us his entire career, certainly his whole political career. And again, to this idea that, oh, he's changing his stance, not really. As far back as 1980, he was saying we need to go after Iran. And again, don't believe me, believe him.
When you get the respect of the other countries, then the other countries tend to do a little bit as you do. And you can create the right attitudes. The Iranian situation is a case in point. That they hold our hostages is just absolutely and totally ridiculous. That this country sits back and allows a country such as Iran to hold our hostages, to my way of thinking, is a horror. And I don't think they'd do it with other countries. I honestly don't think they'll do it with other countries.
Obviously, you're advocating that we should have gone in there with troops, etc., and brought our boys out.
I absolutely feel that, yes. I don't think there's any question, and there's no question in my mind. I think right now would be an oil-rich nation, and I believe that we should have done it, and I'm very disappointed that we didn't do it, and I don't think anybody would have held us in abeyance. I don't think anybody would have been angry with us, and we had every right to do it at the time. I think we've lost the opportunity.
Notice, too, how he framed that there. If we sent in the military, we'd be an oil-rich nation. So presumably we're going to take their oil. I mean, this idea that he was a non-interventionist, that he was ever a non-interventionist, is not really true. I think his gripe, again, with the Bush administration was the whole nation-building democracy project, the idea of invading other countries, using the military, and taking their stuff. This is one of the things he's been consistent on his entire life, along with tariffs, maybe the only two things he's been consistent on his entire life. And his whole approach is very old-fashioned in its way. It's like some old boomer you find at a gun show or something complaining about Hanoi Jane or something like that. There's something admirable about it. It is the basic thing you want in America's leader. But what is America at this point? You look at the Trump administration. You look at some of the more influential figures connected to it. And we don't need to get into every single one of them. But you look at like what, say, the late Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson have managed to do, pushing for the interests of, let's admit it, their ethnic homeland within the Trump administration. And you could argue, and again, I'm trying to be overly fair here. You could argue, oh, well, the Trump administration and America's goals align with their goals, but that's a hell of a coincidence, don't you think? It's undeniable that the Israel lobby is the most influential lobby in American politics, though I'd argue its power is fading, and President Trump, among others, is probably still grappling with that. He may not even fully grasp it. I mean, its power was basically guaranteed in both parties for years. Now, not so much, which is why we're even talking about these sorts of things. And now look at what's happening underneath that. Think of everything we've seen happening over the last few months in Minnesota, where you essentially have a foreign colony that has a presence in Congress. For that matter, you have an important Palestinian voice in Congress, Rashida Tlaib. I mean, it's pretty insulting to compare the Palestinian lobby, if there even is such a thing, to the Israel lobby. There's no comparison. But I will say this. Palestinians have one more champion in Congress than white people do. That's a sad state of affairs, but I think it's the truth. And that's why there's this unreality to this attack in Iran, because the question is not, will America be an empire? Will we secure our national interests? Are we being used for a foreign agenda? Like, all of this it's worth discussing, but it's kind of beside the point. The question is there an America at all? I think there's three variations of takes, broadly speaking, from the right that I've heard about this. One is that the Iran intervention is bad because it's a surrender of sovereignty, and we need to be capable of managing our own affairs. We need our power, our military, our entire force to be marshaled only in our own defense. But again, that presupposes this whole thing is still ours. Like, what is the role of a white American within the modern United States of America? Because that's what we're really talking about. So often it seems like we're the one group that gets no consideration whatsoever. Now, the Trump administration has done some things to change that, and it's going to get a lot worse when they're gone. Everybody seems to think, oh, we'll just get someone better next time. No, there's not going to be a next time. But think of how insulting it is that we even have to talk about this. This is the only country that we have. We don't have a real country we get to go somewhere else to. It's like Hollaback said, there is no Israel for me, right? And it's because this is the only country we have, because we're unhyphenated Americans, that we get so little say. And so isn't there something a little crazy about saying, oh, our military, our empire, our national interests? Because is it? So then you take the logical conclusion of that. You say, okay, well, you don't have a country. Let it go down. Except, what do we gain from that? I mean, you can say, yeah, I won't vote, I won't participate, I won't even try. I won't try to do stuff in primaries or whatever else. I won't give in whatever narratives. Look at what a brave truth teller I am. But you're still going to pay your taxes. You're still going to work your job. And consuming whatever books or media, however edgy, it's still just consumption. Unless it leads to a political effort that captures state power, it's just playing video games. What does it even mean? And once whatever system goes down, or Israel goes down, or whatever else, then we can do something. Do we have to wait for that? Really? I mean, we have other groups organizing for power right now, including immigrant groups, including Muslim groups, by the way, who dissent from the dominant narratives on these sorts of things. And they are building power. Why can't we do the same thing, even in these circumstances? Why is that so unreasonable? I don't think a fatalistic surrender counts as even being in politics. I don't think you get to repudiate your identity. Identity is unchosen. And you can say, well, revolution is when you change your identity. That's how we became American in the first place. Fine. But then what's the plan? What is the revolutionary strategy here? Because in the absence of that, and in the absence of people willing to go that far, and then people like to talk about it, but I think very few people are actually willing to do something about this, I think you've returned to either take over the system as best you can or just be ruled by it. And then you just comfort yourself with whatever narratives that make you feel better. I understand the appeal here. It's good to be like, well, I'm right. I'm against the entire world. I'm a martyr to the truth. You never have to compromise because you're not really in politics and your ideas can never be proven wrong. I understand the appeal, but the problem is you're still ruled by power. And I don't see it as a real solution to just be content with that. And then the last thing, of course, is just to shill, right? Just shill for power. America's kicking ass. We're going to topple Iran. It's going to be great. And I get the appeal of this stuff too. It's good to feel part of the team. And look, the fact is, most of the people we are trying to reach, they will choose this. We are attacking Iran, right? But here's the thing. We are not in power. We are not powerless. Not in the way we have been. And we shouldn't tell ourselves that we're totally powerless. But we are not in power. And this is the point. The modicum of power that does exist really has to be used carefully. And it has to be used to wage what the late Sam Francis called the reconquest of the United States. Sam Francis, probably the leading writer for white identity politics in recent history, once had a debate with somebody over secession. I should point out that my boss, Jared Taylor, has openly talked about secession at this point, and he thinks that's the way forward. And he made the point, Sam Francis, that whites are not going to give up their traditions. They're not going to give up the name of the country. They're not going to give up what they see as their institutions. They're not going to give up their history and whatever else. And he made the excellent point that if you had sufficient will, sufficient solidarity, to break away from the United States and form a new country, a new identity, if you already had those things, you would also already have sufficient will and solidarity to just retake the country. So why not just do that? Like, the focus of power is not what these people are doing to us. The focus is, what can we do? Do we have sufficient solidarity as whites to do something like collective political action? That is the only thing that really matters in the end. I mean, as far as how to look at foreign policy, really, it's always just an extension of domestic policy. And the question really is, does the Trump administration's policy strengthen efforts to rebuild the culture, the economy, the identity of the country? Does it strengthen efforts to deport illegals, restructure legal immigration? And this is not just an abstract thing. Wars can provide lots of ways to do these things. If we're being honest, if we're talking amongst ourselves here, there's no way we actually solve any of these problems we're talking about without a war. It's the only way you can restructure the state in the way you need it to be. But it's not going to be this war. Right now, unless you get a very quick victory, this is going to be a dramatic loss of political capital. And you've got maybe 4 weeks before people start throwing around words like quagmire. Right off the bat, unnecessarily, the Trump administration broached the idea of regime change. That's probably not going to happen. You do not see that coming just from airstrikes. I mean, they did the same thing after the first Persian Gulf War when they told the Iraqis to rise up, and Saddam was able to put them down rather easily. Repression usually works. The idea of just changing the government and hoping for the best, this is a foolish thing to broach unless you're prepared to follow through. And right off the bat, the Trump administration got a little triumphalist. Oh, we killed the leader. Fine. But there's been no defections from the government. I'm not saying that it's not possible. But who do you have? You've got the pretender, you've got Shah Reza Pahlavi, the would-be Shah, I would say. But how much support does this guy even have within the country? Even Trump sort of dismissed the idea that this guy could be the leader. So what is the plan here for regime change? And so what do you end up with? You already have Trump broaching the idea of sending in ground forces, which, to be blunt, if you actually wanted to change the government, you would have to do that. Governments don't fall apart because of airstrikes. This is unnecessary. Every ounce of political will and capital and institutional power has to be dedicated to this task of retaking the country. You have to break these state and local officials defying immigration law. You have to break the courts. You have to reform the bureaucracy. You have to fill it with loyalists. The biggest thing is you have to change the way elections are done. All of this is jeopardized when it's back to the sandbox. And even if they do pull some glorious victory out of their hat within 4 weeks, which seems pretty unlikely on the surface, anything's possible, but if I had to bet, I'd bet against it. It doesn't mean anything unless you do all that other stuff. Because otherwise, what have you really done? You've strengthened a system that is fundamentally against our interests. Like, this is the situation. The war that matters is at home. And now this is being brought home in literal terms. The AP reports, FBI investigates Texas bar shooting that killed 2 and wounded 14 as possible terrorist act. Quote, a gunman wearing clothes with an Iranian flag design in the words property of Allah killed 2 people and wounded 14 early Sunday at a Texas bar, a law enforcement official told the Associated Press. The FBI is investigating the shooting, which erupted a day after the U.S. and Israel launched an attack on Iran, as a potential act of terrorism. Police in Austin shot and killed the gunman who used both a pistol and a rifle to carry out the attack, police said. The shooting happened outside Buford's Backyard Beer Garden just before 2 a.m. along 6th Street, a nightlife destination filled with bars and music clubs and only a few miles from the University of Texas at Austin, unquote. This, on the left, is Ryder Harrington. This is one of the victims. He's one of the people who've been taken from us. And next to him is the gunman. And under the current structure of our beloved American system and the rule of law, these are both your countrymen. The gunman was one Nigia Diagini. There are way too many consonants next to each other there, but he's a naturalized U.S. citizen originally from Senegal. He's just as American as you. He's even more American than you. After all, no less an arch-conservative than Ted Cruz, Texas senator, told us just a few days ago, my approach to immigration is very simple. Legal, good. Illegal, bad. Well, this guy was legal, therefore good, right? The Center for Immigration Studies found that, of course, there may have been multiple opportunities to get this guy out of the country. How did this guy get into the country to begin with? From CIS, quote, the New York Post reports DeAnna was admitted to the United States on March 13, 2000 on a B-2 tourist visa. With limited exceptions, B-2 tourists are generally permitted to remain for 180 days, but DeAnna, the fact that I have to pronounce his name, just nuke the whole thing, was apparently still in this country in June 2006 when he married a U.S. citizen and began the adjustment process to obtain a green card. Just less than 7 years later, in April 2013, DeAnna was naturalized, suggesting he didn't waste much time before applying for citizenship. That said, as the Migration Policy Institute has noted, a much higher percentage of natives of sub-Saharan Africa, such as Senegalese, naturalized compared to immigrants overall. Great. The Post claims that DeAnna, who first resided in New York, went on to lodge a string of other arrests in the Big Apple between 2008 and 2016, which raises the question of how he overcame the hurdles to naturalization so quickly. But as the outlet adds, those 3 arrests are sealed, a common practice under New York law. Strangely, however, the paper also reports that DeAnna applied for asylum in 2016, which doesn't make sense. As a U.S. citizen, he neither would have been eligible to seek humanitarian protection, nor would he have needed it to remain here, unless he was at some point denaturalized, a fact not raised in any reporting on his case. It would, however, have made sense for DeAnna to have filed an affirmative asylum application with USCIS at some point after he entered as a B-2 and before he married a U.S. citizen spouse. Such a filing would have barred both DHS from removing DeAnna while his asylum application was pending and would also have extended his period of authorized status in the country, unquote. How did this happen? All that stuff that I just talked about. Now, CIS, long-standing group when it comes to immigration, what they're doing here is the actual detailed reporting on this nightmarish process that we have, which is studiously ignored by every other group in the country, which is just like, just be nice. And they ask these questions. How was Ndiga DeAnna able to remain after his tourist admission expired? When and why did he apply for asylum? Was his marriage to a U.S. citizen valid or just for green card purposes? And why didn't his criminal record keep him from being naturalized? All great questions. Don't be surprised if authorities are asking them as well. But are they? Probably not. I don't think anybody's asking these questions. If there was some sort of an issue, it's more likely that it will be concealed. And we'll never find out about what really happened. And this is the point. The war is at home. We are in this absurd situation where the president can basically do whatever he wants in foreign policy, but we can't deport one illegal immigrant because we have a whole system in place to say that that's not allowed. You can have alliances with various Muslim states overseas, no problem. But you're probably going to face terrorism from Muslim populations, many of whom are nominally Americans that have been imported here. And you have white people still basically supporting this thing, by which I mean the United States, basically the only people keeping it going. But we're also the one group that get no real consideration from the nation precisely because it is ours, and we have no other. So what's the solution? We either do nothing but keep paying our taxes, support the left to show the right how mad we are, okay, but then giving your explicit enemies more power is probably not going to end well. You can wait for people to wake up when things get really bad, which they won't. And furthermore, I think everybody actually knows this, and nobody's actually saying this seriously. Or we wait until, what? Like Israel is destroyed and then we're allowed to do pro-white stuff or something? No. It's going to be a long, slow process, but it's going to be determined at home. And it's going to be determined chiefly by battles over demographics and race. The United States of America as an entity, as a system, it's just this headless machine that practically anybody can capture. It's just a question of who captures it. The state is something to be conquered. And we have other groups, including groups that are openly enemies with each other, as well as with us, fighting over control of it and taking ownership of parts of it. And we're over here telling us that we can win by not engaging in the fight, or pretending that we actually already won, we own the whole thing and we're actually in power, or that if the people who hate us the most take control, we magically get to win. None of this is true. And I don't think anybody actually believes it. I don't think anyone actually believes what they're saying. And I also don't care about people's moral feelings about the subject. I can't support the system. Well, you're paying taxes. You're supporting the system. That's your life. Accept it. Move on. What are you going to do about it? The objective is actually quite simple when you break it down. The political and cultural reconquest of the United States using white identity politics. Full stop. That's the mission. We need to have explicit pro-white elected officials. We need groups explicitly supporting our interests. We need ways for the government to be funding our efforts the same way NGOs are carrying out a left-wing agenda at your expense. Because until we do that, I think white people are just pay pigs for one faction or another. And it doesn't matter what narratives we tell ourselves that this is actually some brilliant strategy or it's leading to whatever. We're just passive observers in our own story. We're just critiquing our own lives. And if Somalis or whoever else can mobilize in their own community's interest, even in defiance of the most powerful lobbies in the country, I don't see why it's so universally accepted that unhyphenated Americans just can't do the same. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. Our guest today is going to tell us more about the war abroad and how it could play at home. Kaelan Deese is the Justice Department reporter for the Washington Examiner, former reporter for The Hill. He recently wrote an article about how the federal government is stepping up activity against domestic terrorism and so-called sleeper cells in the wake of the attack on Iran. Kaelan joins us now to talk about what comes next. Check it out. Well, Kaelan, thank you so much for joining us here today. Now, as you wrote up in this story just a couple days ago, ever since these Iran attacks started, the federal government is basically saying, look, there's going to be these sleeper cells attacks all over the country. We're stepping up our surveillance and everything else. But it seems like this one attack that we've already seen in Texas, it was just some guy, right? I mean, it doesn't seem to be anything coordinated from the Iranian government or something like that.
That's right, Kevin. Thanks for having me on. What we've seen from the Austin shooting doesn't at least seem to be sort of the nature of the type of attack that the government's been warning about thus far. Obviously, we've been seeing some concerns about potential sleeper cells originating from Hezbollah sects across our hemisphere, perhaps even in Latin America, awakening and things like that. That's been the concern, I will add, but not obviously in this case happening in Austin on 6th Street, which is unfortunately, a location that has been sort of prone to shootings in the past. It's just seems like, because it's a highly populated area, it seems like it's sort of a prime target that often gets picked, and oftentimes it's not even really, we've seen just sort of like scuffles and shootouts and things like that in this location. So it's very dire and unfortunate that this happened. Obviously, this guy had a lot of Islamic sympathies just based off of the things that he was wearing, right. Product of Allah, and then the what appeared to be sort of like an IRGC sort of adjacent type of undershirt that he was wearing. So this is definitely alarming, though, from the perspective of this isn't even necessarily the category of armed terror attacks that the feds are necessarily have been worried about. And, I was speaking with a former FBI agent who was part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force back whenever he was in the line of duty. And he was even assigned to large scale events, types of like stadium events and things like that. That was sort of his duty. And so I was asking him, is this something that you think is going to be a heightened area of concern for some upcoming events happening in the U.S., namely the World Cup happening later this summer? He was very adamant that, obviously the security situation already was going to be high, just by fiat to that being a large event. But this is obviously going to amplify the threat assessment, and it's going to become a definite, area of interest that they're going to want to do a lot more scans for those types of events. We just saw the director of the FBI over in Milan sort of getting some tips on the security situation over there for the Olympics. Obviously, he got a little bit of drama online because he was celebrating
Right.
with the with the team.
Was that the cover of the story they gave? I was wondering about, like, why is this dude even there? I mean, so basically he was over there to consult on security operations and then just happened to end up in the locker room drinking with everybody.
Yeah, I hate to defend. I want to go on the record as I abhor almost defending Kash Patel because I don't think he's done a good job as FBI director.
Right.
But in this FBI's defense, I do know that this was very well in advance pre-planned event. I think dating back to November at least last year, possibly even earlier if I recall. And this is just something that they were doing because the U.S. is going to be hosting its own Olympics in 2028, and I think that is also, I mean, events going forward over the next several years, I think, are going to be on heightened sorts of risk assessments. The other thing too that the FBI agent, and I'll give it back to you in a second, to ask me some more questions, but he was basically saying that this is something that they're going to be what heightened alert means for the federal government is essentially, looking in to already existing, threats that have been flagged, and potentially even sort of trying to dig deeper into potential threats that are already known that have been flagged by NSA correspondence and things like that. It's sort of a all hands on deck situation, and obviously the JTTF works hand in hand with DHS. So it's really just a matter of, being able to, preemptively stop some of these things. And to Kash's credit, again, I don't know why I'm doing this. Maybe I had a change of heart this morning when I woke up, but he has been, helpful, at least with his oversight of the agency and a number of different preemptive types of preempting attacks that were potentially going to happen in the last few months. I believe there was one over New Year's that he had sort of done a victory lap on. So, I mean,
yeah, I remember that. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So where we're at right now
is the thing is right, but this is the thing I wonder about is because as you can tell from the gray in the beard, I remember 9/11 and the aftermath of that, and everybody's saying, "Oh, they're going to be attacking shopping malls, they're going to be attacking sports games, they're going to be doing all these sorts of things," and of course, none of that happened. But when you look at this attack in Texas, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the FBI said, well, he wasn't on our radar. This was just some guy and everything else. Now, this was a guy who was vetted. He was a naturalized citizen. Presumably, there was a lot of paperwork done just to get through that process. There are a lot of questions about how he was able to get it, considering his record of arrests and supposedly overstayed a tourist visa and whatever else. But at the end of the day, this is just some guy. And there seems to be this tendency on the respectable right, shall we call it. Your typical Fox News host will say Iran is planning sleeper cell attacks and they're going to do all these sorts of things. But none of that really happens. But what you do get is basically this alienated anti-American population that we've more or less imported sort of spontaneously launching attacks. Because that's something you really can't police and you can't track because there's millions of them now. And the question just becomes is this just something we deal with forever? I mean, not to suggest that this is specifically what he was saying, but this is how many people interpreted it online. You may have caught Mehdi Hassan saying just a couple days ago on X that if an American president does something in the Middle East, he's basically inviting terror attacks from all these extremists. It's well, yeah, but we wouldn't have to worry about that if these people weren't here to begin with.
That's an amazing point you just made, and it's even more concerning from the standpoint that I've seen expressed even by people in my there's a dog in my backyard, so just by simply talking to some friends about this who have expressed some reservations about us going in there. It's absolutely asinine that I've seen that same exact talking point being repeated by people in my own social circles. And I sort of blame that on the broader talking points that people like Hassan are making, because people like him put those ideas into the ether and it spreads and it becomes sort of this moral justification of, it's kind of like what we sort of saw in the, decade post 9/11, where you start to see more people almost saying that, America's activities in the Middle East sort of are to blame or the cause for that. So it's like there seems to be this like sort of like virtue, sort of like taking this higher road of like, oh well, we're the highest superpower in the country or in the world, and because of our interference in the Middle East, it's like this is just what more par for the course, what we should expect. When in reality, it's just succumbing to these dangerous kind of like feedback narratives that I think people on the far left.
It's an immigration thing. I mean, it's fundamentally an immigration problem. It's not really a foreign policy problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like people being unable to like call it out for what it is. I think is also a huge problem as well. I mean, look at the deportation numbers right now. I mean, they're simply not high enough to account for this type of it's like you were saying just a second ago, this guy was vetted. Well, obviously vetting isn't enough. We needed to go back and do double checks and triple checks on some of these people and consider whether past vetting was even justified for certain individuals. I mean, the problem that the past administration.
I don't mean to interrupt, but not to put you on the spot, but I just don't want to lose sight of this point. I did see a report that he may have had some involvement with the State Department. Is that something they're still looking into, this particular shooter? Or was that just more of a reference to him being a naturalized citizen?
I think as of now, that's the closest sort of reference point that I've been able to track. I haven't seen like anything other than like, I think the State Department's context surrounding this, like I think surrounds that vetting issues. So I haven't seen any like further links to the State Department. I mean, I think it's something to keep an open mind about, but truthfully, I haven't seen anything beyond just the vetting aspect of it that you're referring to.
Well, we all remember that when you had those two National Guardsmen attacked, I believe one killed, that was an Afghan translator who, for all intents and purposes, was a federal employee, was I believe, technically CIA in terms of at least who he was contracting for. And this guy was brought in. He was presumably vetted. He was presumably vetted before that to work with American service members and everything else. And this is what you get. And the larger point basically is that you have entire subcultures in this country, which for all intents and purposes are not really part of the country. They don't think of themselves as American. They don't really particularly like America. And yet, regardless of who's in charge, they keep getting imported. I mean, every once in a while, I see this narrative all the time, and it drives me nuts, where they say that after 9/11, when Bush was president, that you were allowed to somehow hate Islam, or that you were encouraged somehow to hate Muslims because that was cheering on neoconservative foreign policy. And I said, what are you talking about? The very first thing Bush did was give a speech about how great Islam is. Islamic immigration to the United States skyrocketed after 9/11, and the opinion of Islam in the United States, particularly among conservatives, dramatically increased because that's what we were told to do. I mean, not to be too simple on it, and I don't think that this is necessarily true of the Trump administration, but when you look at American foreign policy, regardless of who's in charge, it's basically been a variation of what Steve Saylor said. It's invade the world, but it's also invite the world. And then you get things like this.
Yeah, and I think that, like, just from my own anecdotes, I mean, I've taken so many Ubers in and out and across DC. And this is important too. I mean, like you hop in any random Uber car around here, and I mean, odds are that you wind up being driven by that former Afghani, person of the same type of pedigree that you were just describing. It's a high amount for me, and it's really interesting when you get into conversations with these people, or you start asking them, about their experience that they've had in America since they were brought over here, since the fall of Kabul, and they really give this sort of fish out of water type of expression about their life. They don't like necessarily the fact that they're sort of confined here, that they're sort of homesick in a weird type of way. It's like but they know they can't return home, and so they kind of have this sort of existential type of dread looming over them, and it's not to pull a sympathy cord with it, but it's almost to say, like, these people don't belong here. They themselves know they don't belong here. And I think that in some ways, you get kind of like a sort of like a reverse, what do they call it? Like the Paris effect or Paris syndrome or whatever.
Yeah.
but like for a Middle Eastern person living now here in America, living now, like everyone's white, or there's like some, other ethnicities that they're not used to living around. And it's just, the cultural differences really matter too. And it's just, they're not made for this society. And a lot of times, like I was saying, they understand that they're not. So you can only imagine sort of like the type of mental toll that might take on an individual, and where it might sort of bring them to, react and sort of say, well, F it, like I'm just gonna, take matters into my own hands. And I think that when you see, they're investigating this guy in Austin for sympathies with the Iran government, and sort of a retaliation over these strikes. And it kind of, creates its own just breed of, mass shooting genre of, these types of folks that I think will probably see more like him.
Right. Mm-hmm. The cultural alienation just naturally leads to these sorts of things. I mean, essentially, it's the same thing that they used to say about cultural alienation with school shootings back in the 90s, where you have like the outcast doing it. Now, of course, you see a lot of transgenders doing it. I mean, essentially, it's all just a variation on the theme. And there have been a few cases where you have not even necessarily Islamic, but there was some Hmong mass shootings a few years ago, and people would say, like, well, why is this happening? It's like, well, because this guy's here. He feels alienated. He doesn't like the larger community. He knows at some level he doesn't belong here. F it, like you said. I mean, I think we are going to see more of this kind of thing. The interesting thing with the Islamic terrorism angle, of course, is that Iran is Shiite, and most of the Muslim world is not. And when we think of the type of groups that come to mind when you think of Islamic terrorism, so to speak, they tend not to be Shiite. They tend to be Sunni. And it seems like in this conflict, most of the Sunni powers and even some of the extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and places like that are even aligning against Iran. I think even the Taliban had, I mean, who knows with everything that's online, but even the Taliban had some sort of a statement where they were like, Iran and Israel are two sides of the same coin. And if you don't get that, like, you're a heretic, basically. So the question becomes, is this just, I mean, I'm not familiar with the religious background of this guy or the predominant form of Islam in Senegal, where this guy was from, but are people who are attaching themselves to this sort of thing, are they even Muslim, or are they just sort of attaching it because it's in the news and this is just a way to strike back at America, Israel, whatever? Or is there actually something serious going on in terms of an organized effort directed by Iran? Because I got to say, I've been hearing that my whole life, and I'm kind of skeptical of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's even been, strange, sort of like, suppositions about what the sort of the next person in line to the Ayatollah having, I believe, some strange, interesting political backgrounds about just like sort of his philosophy, and having like almost like some almost like I don't want to misquote exactly what I had read, but it was almost like having some almost like Marxist types of connections or feelings about his about the way that the government should be structured there in Iran. And I just think that when you take a look at the way that the mass population has sort of reacted to Israel since October 7th, it's increasingly become this, popular position on different horseshoes of either the left or the right that essentially, Israel is the one that's the terrorist state. And now we're seeing, sort of the fruits of that thought process sort of play out in the hearts and minds of some American people. And, sort of taking, almost like, you see a lot of Christians who are saying like, is this a just war? Because they don't necessarily maybe buy the preemptive strike posture that the administration has been putting out there. And I think, it was I think it was Sinwar, the head of, Hamas, who was even like sort of like espousing his surprise at the amount of people in the West that had sympathy for sort of the Palestinian side in the Israel-Gaza war. And I think that, that PR war that's been trying to win, tug on the heartstrings of Americans and people elsewhere is what is contributing to this by even allowing an ounce of sympathy in to the conversation for the targets of some of these military strikes. It's creating a dichotomy where you don't know if the person sitting next to you on the bus is even aligned with America. You saw that woman. Oh my gosh! Like what's her name? Cassie from Tim Pool's time, working in Tim Pool's office. She's no longer there, but she was reposting that video of that military wife who was like saying, you know, F everyone who supports this because her husband is an active duty. And that was just kind of, I mean, like that video went crazy viral. And like, think about how many people see that and they treat it as like case in point, like, look, a military spouse is, you know, speaking out against this. And that is just another sort of wrinkle in the propaganda fold that they're able to sort of, you know, push out to Americans and say, like, you know, is this really, is your government really working for you? And then, you know, all the, you know, MAGA adjacent types who have been, you know, for months saying that this is going to become an I told you so moment. And now they're saying, I told you so. And it's like, told us what? You never predicted that we would, you know, behead the entire government in the span of 48 hours of Iran. I mean, I think the goalpost keeps shifting for a lot of those types of people. And none of them, you know, everyone thought that, you know, it was going to take, you know, such a long time to actually effectuate the outcome that they were able to. And they did it, you know, before, after market hours closed and before they reopened on Monday. And obviously we still have strikes coming down the line, and Trump saying this is going to potentially be 4 weeks, you know, but I kind of, you know, like, call me naive, but I kind of almost take his word a little bit whenever he's talking about the timeline of this, because at the end of the day, Trump knows better than anyone else that the longer he stays in a armed military conflict situation, the more that people in his base are going to start to, you know, turn their backs on him, and he doesn't want to see that more than anyone else, and he wants to get this job finished and over with.
Well, to some extent, I mean, obviously, I talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, but there was this quote from Rubio yesterday where basically he said, look, we went in because Israel was going to do these strikes, and if we didn't go in, we would get dragged into it. So this became Israel dragged us into the war. Now, the fuller context is that he didn't quite say that, but there's no other way to interpret it other than Israel at least got to more or less dictate the timing of these strikes. And so now you're in this situation where you're striking these targets in the Middle East, and it's become almost like a self-referential meta foreign policy. Well, why are we attacking Iran? Because they were going to hit our bases in the Middle East and we don't want casualties. Well, why do we have bases in the Middle East? Because we need them to protect against Iran. It's like, what are we driving at here? And the problem, of course, too, is that you're doing this while you have this diverse population in the United States. And let's not beat around the bush. It's not just all the various Muslim populations, but it's also populations that feel attached to the Jewish state who are all carrying out their own sort of agenda. And it seems that I think a lot of Americans are looking around and saying, what exactly is our dog in this fight? But also, what kind of blowback are we going to get for being dragged into this? I mean, is it fair to say that the attack in Texas, because some are calling it, is blowback? Or was it essentially just, for lack of a better word, just urban crime? I mean, it was just some guy going nuts. And if it wasn't this, it would have been something else. Because as you say, I mean, there's no indication that this guy was linked to any kind of like official Iranian effort or something like that. For all intents and purposes, it might have just been a drive-by shooting.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, like, there could have been a number of different motivations that would have struck the chord to cause this guy to act. And, you know, in some ways, too, I think that, you know, people who are already have homicidal tendencies and think that they're going to go out with something like this might just sort of see it as a convenient thing to tether themselves to. It's like that guy that, yeah, it's like that guy who stormed into Mar-a-Lago a couple weekends ago, and he was apparently motivated by Jeffrey Epstein related things. And, you know, he was like, I think he was 21 years old. And it's like, you got to ask yourself, how long does this guy really cared about the Epstein issue,
Right.
or and juxtapose that with how long maybe he's been on the brink of doing something just completely homicidal and suicidal simultaneously, and maybe that was just the thing that he wanted his these people are
This
always
was the excuse, right? Yeah.
These people are always seeking a higher form of excuse, so it doesn't look so trivial, or it doesn't let them sort of
Right.
their name die out in a fizzle. They're looking for something to sort of mark their territory of why they're so virtuous or righteous in their twisted type of atrocity. And I think that we're definitely seeing the media start to make suppositions or reaches that try to amount to the level that the U.S. government is warning about, but maybe we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, it does seem that, I mean, this is a bit afield, but it's an important point. During Trump's first presidential run, you remember a lot of things that were said that were useful to the Trump campaign. But let's face it, probably weren't all that true. I mean, you had all these various things about spirit cooking and Pizzagate and the foundation in Haiti that the Clintons were involved in and everything else. And nothing was really ever proven in the sense of like, haha, here are some documents that we got. But there was a lot of weird leaked emails. There were a lot of things that didn't look particularly good for Hillary Clinton. And the Trump administration, not even the Trump campaign, but just sort of Trump's online supporters were able to sort of use all of that to create this web of suspicion where you could just say stuff. It wasn't even backed by anything, but you could just say stuff like, oh, Hillary Clinton's in bed with all these like occult weirdos and everything else. Well, now it seems that it's kind of turned, and this sort of thing can be said about Trump because, I mean, you have members of Congress just sort of saying without really any evidence or any firm backing anything like, oh, well, Trump is probably like a child molester. Trump is like a pedophile. And then Trump supporters will come back and be like, oh, yeah, well, your guy is a pedophile, whatever else. And now you basically have this climate where not only do we no longer have a united American population, so it's kind of silly to even talk about an American national interest, but we don't even have basic agreement on the facts other than basically all the elites are somehow criminals and probably involved in very weird stuff. And you can't really prove it, but you don't even have to anymore. Everybody just kind of assumes it's true. And so I think when I looked at shooting in Texas, it's not so much like, this is blowback from the terrorism or something like that. It's more just American society is just completely fragmented, and we're just going to get more and more of these people self-detonating over and over again. And the ideology they espouse is almost irrelevant.
Yeah, it truly is. It's just like what is like the new what is the new flavor that we can sort of like add to Americans' discourse, and I think that you see the results of this happening in people's shifts in opinion, and at the end of the day, I don't know what you can say about some of the other types of attacks that we've seen in the last, like you mentioned the National Guardsmen that were shot, and we also had this guy from Chicago that I'm writing about later today that just pleaded guilty to new terrorism related charges over the murder of these two Israeli embassy staffers. So it's like that was another one too, where I think that you're talking about a guy that just needed to be freaking kicked out of the country before this could even happen.
Do you think? Do you think he was actually driven by anger against Israel, or was this just like this was the convenient target?
To me, it's sort of something we still have to met out a little bit more. I mean, we're still pretty early into his case. I mean, he's facing 13 counts in this superseding indictment that just came a couple months ago, and I mean, I think that he's definitely it's saying that he was acting with the intent to influence government policy related to Israel and its war on Gaza. That's what the government's espousing. So definitely interesting to see sort of that wrinkle into the fold, because they're really trying to beat it over this case, that was his motivation. So I think that, just based off of, like the different, elements of this case, it seems like that might hold up, but we really just gotta see how Janine Pirro's office handles this one, and hopefully she doesn't F it up like some of the other cases that she's brought in DC.
Yeah, there definitely have been some. I mean, of course, also you're dealing with DC judges and DC juries. I mean, you could almost have it on video doing whatever you want, and they're still going to get off. Leads me to the next point, a little bit separate from foreign policy, but something else you wrote about recently, which is that a lot more people just got arrested in these church invasions up in Minnesota. And this is something that the federal government has a tremendous amount of power to go after people for so-called civil rights violations, where if you do any kind of a conspiracy to violate Americans' ability to practice their civil rights, like freedom of worship, freedom of speech, you can basically be brought up on federal charges. And this is something that has been deployed against the right for many, many years now. Now the Trump administration is trying to use it against the left and try to use it to break up some of these networks. Do you see this effort continuing? Because we've got that Antifa trial down in Texas going on now. That's the first time that you've seen an effort to go after an Antifa group in this way. You have these arrests up in Minnesota. But a lot of people on the right are still saying, look, after Charlie Kirk died, you promised this sweeping crackdown on Antifa. And frankly, what we've seen so far is pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, bringing that case in Texas over the ambush that happened at the ICE facility, that was I think the administration really probably gave themselves 2 pats on the back for that one. They felt like they were doing something, hearty there, and it's a step in the right direction. But it doesn't really amount to, I mean, what this case is going to do the most is, be able to put on the record that there were defendants that pleaded guilty to crimes associated with being part of a anti-fascist network, and really give some credibility, I think, to that label that I think for a long time, even the first Trump admin had just kind of floated it being sort of a designated terrorist label, but didn't get really much further than that. And then to the point about the FACE Act charges, I mean, it was recently they added, I think they made that a 39 defendant case, and that should cover, I believe, every person that was involved in that incident. And it's good that they added the additional people, because for a time when they just had, I think it was 9 defendants, it was a little bit, to me, from a legal standpoint, I was a little concerned about it, because I didn't think that, like, why would you only go after a subset of people that were involved in this? So you got to arrest every single person. Otherwise, it does look a little bit, why are you just going after some of the top level people, Don Lemon, the other journalist that was part of this. So it's good that they made it a more wholesome case. And, this is the first time I think we've seen the administration actually use the FACE Act to its fullest extent. And it's good in the respect that we're seeing equal application across the board now. I do think that, just from a personal standpoint, I'm the kind of person who thinks that real ID laws are unconstitutional. So I like to pull up every now and then a couple of statutes that I don't think necessarily should even be on the books. And one of those is the FACE Act. I don't think that that's even a law that's necessary. You can go back, and see all the other cases that were targeting pro-lifers that
oh, yeah. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
And absolutely no church types of protest, as incidents, or people that were being heckled outside of churches were prosecuted for that, and that's another component of the law. So I just think the fact that it was so unevenly applied, since its inception, and the fact that you saw so many people on the GOP just right before Trump took office again trying to repeal the FACE Act. I mean, my philosophy is, like, why not keep up that momentum? Because it's a bad law, and there's other trespassing types of charges that you can get. Now, I will give this caveat that, I mean, I don't think that the state of Minnesota would have prosecuted this if they were, if they were tied up and forced to. Like, I think that they were very adamant about not doing anything with this Cities Church case, and so I think that that's sort of what prompted the federal government to have to get involved. And kudos to them for being vigilant on that. But it would be amazing, I think, that maybe we could see this case go through, and some years pass, being generous given how slow things move around here, and we could eventually see the FACE Act just kind of be something that is something of the past, and try to just go after people on more standard trespassing charges, things like that, because I just don't like the idea that we're creating sort of redundant statutes that are, we already have laws on the books that would punish people who perform a stunt like this.
Well, just for really quickly, just for people who don't know, what is the main thing with the FACE Act? I mean, because I know what the FACE Act is, but it is pretty terrifying in terms of what you can actually use it to arrest people for. But of course, as you say, I mean, it's been used for a very long time, and against right-wingers and against Christians, nobody had a problem with it. Now that the Trump administration is doing it, suddenly all these people are discovering the violations of civil liberties and how unconstitutional it is and everything else.
Yeah, so the maximum sentence that a judge can impose for a prosecution under the FACE Act is 10 years. And so what the FACE Act does is it makes it illegal for anyone to obstruct or impede a person's access to a abortion clinic, anything that, like a Planned Parenthood. And, we saw Trump give, I believe I want to say it was 26 or so pardons to people who were previously facing prosecution under the FACE Act. And it's something that, could be charged just as for something just as trivial or benign as somebody temporarily sort of kneeling in front of a door to a clinic and engaging in prayer, and maybe a person would have to walk around that person to get the door open or something like that. It's even if obstruction isn't completely impeded, it's up to the eyes of the prosecutor to take a look at what happened, and if they decide that they think it was a FACE Act violation, it's a pretty low barrier to entry to try to convince a grand jury to send a true bill on that. And that's the problem, is I think just you can, whenever you're in a grand jury proceeding as a prosecutor, you're a king for a day, and you really get a lot of leeway to convince the jury, what should be considered right or wrong. And so I think that past administrations just had a field day with this statute. It was passed about, I want to say, 40-ish years ago. Had some bipartisan support, even with the support of Mitch McConnell, all because they agreed at the end there to amend it to include the church provision.
Churches. But
the problem with the church provision too, and this is the problem with the case in Minnesota, is that some legal experts have been pointing out that there isn't really a interstate commerce type of nexus to the church part of the provision. So the issue that you come in is well, what exactly is the interstate commerce component that would sort of be triggered by people going into church protest, and that being sort of the predicate for bringing a FACE Act. I mean, those people were already inside the church. They were already worshiping. Yes, they were interrupted. Yes, that's egregious and disgusting that happened. But they're going to try to fight it basically by saying that the government is misinterpreting what the statute actually says, which is a problem because it just shows that the people, the framers, and the Republicans that crossed the line to support this act years and years ago didn't do their due diligence and make sure that their little asterisk provision that involves churches wasn't more secured and fortified. And that's why I still think it's a bad law, because you had framers that were completely indifferent to making sure that the language was just as stringent as it was for abortion clinics. Well, yeah, I mean, they threw it in there because they didn't want to be seen as voting against this thing, but they needed some sort of an excuse so their own voters didn't vote them out. And so they probably didn't care one way or the other. I mean, they just kind of threw it in there. It's pretty obvious when you look at how the history of that bill was passed. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if all these people get off in Minnesota and all these prosecute, because I mean, at this point,
it seems like there's a full scale. This will be the last thing we can go into, but it's gotten to the point where it's almost making me question the existence of the independent judiciary itself, because it's gotten to the point where it's completely out of control, where you have judges seemingly knowing that people are guilty, but like letting them go out of spite, making rulings in defiance of higher courts that say you are not allowed to rule on these kinds of things. And then they kick it back to the lower court. The lower court just does the same thing over and over again. The Trump administration can apparently kidnap foreign leaders and then start wars without a congressional vote and do all sorts of incredible things, but you can't deport like a single illegal immigrant without years and years and years of hearings and everything else. And there comes a point, and I think we may be reaching it, where given that the Republicans are never going to impeach any of these people, regardless of how egregious the conduct, at what point does the Trump administration just start ignoring these people? I mean, there might be a case where they're already going to do that. I think you have some illegals who are already deported, and you have a judge saying you have to bring them back. Trump administration is probably just going to be like, well, no, they're not under our jurisdiction anymore.
Yeah, I'm actually covering one of those cases involving the deportation of almost 200 Venezuelans, and that's precisely what the Judge Boasberg is trying to do. And
it's always
DC
Boasberg,
right
isn't it? It's just Boasberg over and over again.
Yeah, and but to the point about Minnesota judges for a second, they've been essentially like ostensibly handed bench slaps from a couple of different circuit courts about the way that they've been handling some of these cases where they offer these habeas hearings for illegal immigrants who have been arrested by ICE, and the Fifth Circuit and the Eighth Circuit now have sort of tried to pump the brakes on these cases where judges are bringing in a new defendant. The defendant basically, files a habeas petition to try to challenge their arrest and their holding. And these judges in Minnesota, many of them are Democratic appointees, are just sort of handing these people, release on limited reconnaissance, and basically just giving them like, a complete slap on the wrist during the initial stages of their detainment. And that's precisely the thing that's going completely against what I think is the language in the text of the Immigration Nationality Act. I mean, we don't have to have a Supreme Court 2-hour oral argument about the merits of what the INA says. I mean, the INA is clear that if there's an illegal that is in the country and has not reported for their court hearings or has been dodging them or just seems to be completely recalcitrant to what the law is, that we're allowed to take these people in and hold them pending their further deportation. So I don't quite understand why district judges seem to think that there's a more of a gray area in here. I think that unfortunately, maybe it's going to take another circuit court and maybe even like a appeal to the Supreme Court, where I find it very hard to believe that they would want to waste their time sort of divulging or getting into the weeds of what the INA statute says. I could see them basically getting an emergency petition and issuing maybe like a 6-3, preliminary stay that is telling all these lower courts to essentially stop what you're doing, stop making ICE's job harder, and then maybe a strongly worded dissent from Justice Jackson or Sotomayor.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, Jackson will just make some.
For your viewers out there that look at the makeup of the Supreme Court and they see 6-3 Republican appointed advantage, and they keep wondering, why all these setbacks keep happening. I mean, look at some of the things that are happening right now on the emergency docket. What you see oftentimes is you get a order that is favorable to the administration, that is staying, something that a lower court judge did. But meanwhile, you don't really have a lot of actual text written from the majority that went along with it. And you're given a 400, 500 word dissent. That's all the district judges really have to go off of, as far as substantial, rhetoric to point to. And I mean, it's even been cited in this one case out of Massachusetts. It was last week. I can't remember the exact policy issue that was at hand, but it was basically it was about third country deportations. That's what it was. And a Massachusetts judge has been like twice rejected or sort of bench slapped by the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the Massachusetts Democratic appointee, I mean, I hate to admit, but he brought up a good point, which is that the majority didn't say enough. They didn't say enough about this third country issue when they really should have provided more text. And all you have are liberal justices speaking to the point, and you're basically giving an unforced error. I mean, it's a problem of the Supreme Court justice. It's a problem of John Roberts. And I think that they should really, think twice next time whenever they issue one of these emergency decisions, that should we give, not just the public, but should we give the lower judges some sort of insight into what we're thinking on this, rather than just letting the minorities speak on the entire, rest of the pages.
I get the impression that Chief Justice Roberts is almost embarrassed about being seen as on the right. And so I think he thinks that if he takes a strong stand on anything, or can be identified clearly with one side or the other, it'll undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the problem is, and this goes to the whole issue of the rule of law as such, if you have justices who just don't, or judges who don't care about that, who say, no, I'm essentially a political actor, the fact that I wear a robe and I'm not technically a lawmaker doesn't really make a difference. If those people are going to confidently assert their policy preferences as law, and the other side is not going to do it because they say, well, we need to give the appearance of being fair-handed and we need to not take a strong stand one side or the other, the group that is more cynical about this whole thing is going to win every single time. I mean, it's basic game theory. I've been amazed when you look at somebody like Jackson on the Supreme Court. I think the whole country has been amazed when you see some of the things that she's been saying, and she speaks more than any other justice on there, where she's essentially, in some cases, and this even happened in one of the decisions, I think it was Barrett of all people who knocked her down for this, she's not even citing laws. She's not even citing doctrine. She's just sort of making up things as she goes along. But because her feelings are so strong about it, she thinks like this should carry the day. And the problem, of course, is that when the mainstream media is constantly celebrating her as speaking truth to power, she might be right.
Yeah, I mean that's the it's funny. One time I attended a speech last year with Barrett. It was the Barry Weiss talk that they had, and I think there was like a question that was asked whether she had engaged or thought about some of the Trump supporter types of people like Mike Davis, sort of labeling her as the word wasn't like rhino justice, but it was something to that effect. And, she basically kind of just like passes it off as like, well, I have my husband who kind of flags any sort of things to me if he thinks I need to see them that might involve controversies. And that didn't really make the cut or didn't make the list of things that I'd seen. So she basically kind of dismisses it as noise, whenever she sees criticisms coming from the right. And I don't think it necessarily, I mean, coming from someone like her,
Jackson. This is Jackson or Barrett?
Justice Barrett. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Justice Barrett sat down with Barry Weiss and, basically just sort of like brushed off any sort of criticism coming from, voices on the right, firebrands like Mike Davis and things like that. And, I think, it's just interesting whenever you see someone like her getting sort of like dogpiled on, just because I don't know what, really value or effect that has. Like, obviously you want to try to give encouragement or give direction from a public standpoint of how you think a justice should be ruling. But whenever she herself sort of like admits that, she doesn't even really pay attention to much of those things, it's like, seems to just be falling on deaf ears. It seems like at this point right now, the best justice of the trio is Kavanaugh, because he was so adamant, to defend Trump's tariffs under, his Liberation Day tariffs. And, he's at least, he seems to be sort of giving more weight towards sort of the Alito faction, the Thomas faction of the court. The other two, Gorsuch and Barrett, I think that they just kind of are free agents in their own respects.
Yeah, it's I think it's very misleading to talk about the Supreme Court having like a conservative or right wing majority when most of that block would be very uncomfortable thinking of themselves in that way. Whereas the progressives on the court, I mean, they know what they are. They regard the Supreme Court basically as a tiny legislature, and they know what their job is, which frankly is why they get their way most of the time. Last question. I mean, I know it's coming up, and frankly, I'm willing to forgive an awful lot if this goes the way I want it to, but I have very little confidence, not least because Barrett's on there. The birthright citizenship case that's going to be coming up between the Supreme Court, because that would change everything overnight. But if it does not go the way the Trump administration wants, I have a hard time seeing a realistic way out of this as far as the immigration crisis goes. Any predictions on where do you think that's going to go?
Well, I'll give you my prediction, but Kevin, did you see the amicus brief that was filed by the Catholic Church in that case?
I did. It was filed by a guy who is not a Catholic, first of all, and apparently most of the leading Catholic philosophers on this issue, I think Aquinas himself would apparently be written out of the church. I think didn't Aquinas say something that it's not even the first generation, but it's like 2 generations down before you even consider naturalization?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, so many problems, I think, with that amicus brief, and just let alone the fact that the Catholic, it goes completely against their philosophy when it comes to matters, maybe, I don't know, pertaining to Vatican City. I think it's for those who haven't like seen it, basically the Catholic Church is dying on the hill that this sort of like love thy neighbor, this sort of like tradition, sort of idea of birthright citizenship being something that is to be held, even though it doesn't even comport with what the 14th Amendment is about. And we all know that that's about slavery. And so this idea that the 14th Amendment has been sort of twisted and construed over time to sort of be this airtight doctrine that protects a concept like birthright citizenship, I think is one of the biggest misnomers of our time. And I think that that results in this sort of feedback loop that you see among legal scholars who will say that this was a settled issue long ago, when it seems like that just seems to be like sort of talking points to try to get away from actually debating the merits of it, which is, right. If you and it's not a question of if you have a U.S. citizen and a non-U.S. citizen, that born a baby together. It's simply, this anchor baby problem that, is specifically contributing, I think, to what we talked about at the origin of this discussion, where you have, this entire class of people that are not in any way, shape, or form actually tethered to the U.S. other than by proxy to their where they were born. And I think that it's just such a asinine loophole that we've just sat on for so long. I mean, I can get emotional about it, or I can get legal about it, but like at the end of the day, I think it's something that we can firmly attest that this hasn't actually been something that the courts have truly weighed as a whether it comports with the Constitution. I think so. I'm happy at least that the court is entertaining it from that standpoint. I don't know how they're going to come up with a decision if they disappoint us that says that this was somehow a beacon of the 14th Amendment, that this is what the 14th Amendment meant. And I also don't know how it's going to really drastically cause this catastrophe that many people seem to think that it would cause. I mean, no way in hell is the Supreme Court going to make this retroactive to apply to people who have already been naturalized. I mean, that would be, just chaotic from a logistics perspective. And, maybe some people want to see it happen that way, but I mean, let's just let's just sort of get to, starting points. I don't think they're going to go retroactive with a decision if they find that birthright citizenship is something that cannot stand or cannot comport to the 14th Amendment, and essentially rule in favor of the Trump administration's executive order. Now, that being said, I'm also, like you, a little bit dubious to the idea of them being willing to go that far. But how do they write that in such a way that says this executive order cannot stand? I mean, it just seems like they would have to be going through so many hoops to try to convince the public that that's the right outcome. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if they're calling balls and strikes, that they're going to uphold Trump's executive order. If they're not, then they're gonna come up with some sort of mealy-mouthed explanation about well, this is just something that's always been, and we're not going to change it. And or maybe it's not for the court. Maybe it's not for the courts to decide. But it's like, well, you're the one that took it up.
What are you for? Right.
Courts are the ones that stopped this executive order. So you have to make a determinative outcome of this. So we'll see what happens. I want to stay optimistic about it because I want to think that there's some sanity that's still out there, and hope that there was some value added to putting 3 Trump appointees on the court. But we shouldn't hold our breath, and we should definitely wait just to see what happens.
Yeah, being hopeful, but with the necessary dose of cynicism is usually the best guide going forward in these sorts of things. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. I really appreciate you joining us. Where can people find you? Because it's not just where you're writing right now. You've got some other projects as well, yes?
Yeah, I've got a couple other things I'm working on. So just for starters, if you want to find my bylines, you can find me online. Just Google Kaelan Deese. That's Kaelan Deese. And on the side, I do a podcast called Meme Ranch. It's called Meme Ranch Podcast. We just relaunched under that name on YouTube, and you can also find us on Podbeam and other things. And we've been doing some pretty cool interviews. For one, we started with Michael Tracy, sort of talking about the Epstein mythos and how he's been sort of debunking that over the last several years. And it's quite interesting if you have any thoughts about Epstein and maybe where your preconceptions lie. It's interesting to challenge your where you stand on that issue by listening to that interview. And we have Kyle Seraphin coming up soon, former FBI agent, that's going to be talking on our show. So if you're interested in his takes on Kash Patel, which are not too friendly, even though they used to be friends, it'll be interesting to hear that. So thanks for having me on, Kevin. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. To conclude here, there is a malevolence behind our leaders, and by our leaders, I don't just mean America, but throughout the West, that is so extreme and so remarkable that it's actually hard to explain. And you especially see this in Canada. So, this is Jaskarit Singh Sidhu. In 2018, he killed 16 people after driving a semi through a stop sign. Of course, he got a slap on the wrist, full parole by 2023. But now, you have leading political figures saying that was too much. You have John Manley, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, and Jamie Basile, former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in Nova Scotia. So a bipartisan coalition of 2 fairly important people arguing that this guy particularly, needs to be allowed to stay in the country. Quote, a judge sentenced Sidhu to 8 years in prison in 2019, an unusually long sentence for this offense, and he was granted full parole in 2023. The criminal justice system did its work. It determined guilt and imposed a stiff sentence. Now, even though Sidhu has served his sentence, our government faces a new question. Should he and his family be allowed to get on with their lives, or should he be expelled from the country? This is no longer a question about innocence or culpability. It's about what happens once a lawful penalty has been completed. It's about whether punishment in Canada ends when a court-imposed sentence ends, or whether it continues indefinitely if you happen to be an immigrant. These are all legal questions. Get on with their lives. That's how they phrase it. Should he be allowed to get on with their lives? It goes further than that. One question which you notice did not even come up here. How does Canada benefit from having this guy in the country? Like, what's he going to do anyway? He's just going to be a truck driver again? It doesn't even occur to them to ask that question. It might be illegal to ask, but it goes further. People talk about suicidal empathy, and I admit I have my problems with some of this approach because you wonder, is it really empathy, or is it being you're advancing the interests of some other group and the empathy is just sort of a cover? But then you hear something like this. Here's the example, quote, but for us, as Canadians, the real question is a moral one. What kind of a country do we want? Are we a nation that is punitive, vengeful, and mean-spirited? Or are we a country that can demonstrate mercy, compassion, and forgiveness? If the latter, can we demonstrate these Canadian values even when the victims were junior hockey players and the offender was an immigrant? Unquote. Now, of course, that's the only reason they're championing these values. If it was a Canadian hockey player and he hit a bunch of immigrants, they'd probably put him to death. I mean, did you catch the way they frame this? You're the evil one. He just had an accident. They actually say elsewhere in this article, who among us can say they never blew through a stop sign? Well, I can say I never blew through a stop sign, and I especially never did it while driving a semi as a professional truck driver. But this fact is of no moral importance. In fact, it's mean-spirited to have him not be in the country. Now, of course, this is the way they think about immigration. It's just about being nice. Now, immigration should be entirely centered on what you gain from having these people in the country. Now it's about showing how much better you are than other people. And the worst part, this whole moral framework, as flawed as it is, this is their killer argument about why Canada must remain sovereign and independent, presumably from the United States. Quote, this country has spent the past year asserting its national sovereignty, a right to make decisions grounded in our own laws and values. Sovereignty, however, is not simply about control. It is about our shared national values and living by those values, even when it is hard, such as when our justice and immigration systems overlap. Unquote. Get that? The reason you have to have this guy who killed your kids in the country is to stick it to Trump. Let this guy stay in the country. That'll show those Republicans. And then a little later, quote, Canada does not practice exile as a form of permanent condemnation. We do not impose life sentences for negligence. We do not believe that a person is defined forever by a single mistake, however devastating. These are our shared values. They apply to everyone, or at least they should. The federal government should halt the process of deporting sit-who, unquote. Has to be said plainly. If those are your values, they are worthless values. They need to be utterly ripped out. And I refuse to call this compassion. It's a cynical malevolence. You're asserting moral superiority by using the country to benefit those who have caused indescribable suffering, because they caused indescribable suffering, by dismissing that suffering, because after all, it was just white people. And so maybe they kind of had it coming. And of all the things happening up north, this is what they want to take a stand on. Say I'm totally wrong. Say they're entirely motivated by benevolence and compassion. Say they really are empathetic. Of all the things that are happening in the entire country, this is what they want to speak out on. This is the most important thing. This is the thing they can't stay silent about. Now, do you think this is mere idealism or something more sinister? I think that's a very easy decision. Near the end, they say, quote, sovereignty is ultimately about who we are. That is true. It is about the values we choose to uphold, even in the most difficult circumstances. I agree with that. But if this is what you are choosing to uphold as a defining example, your country actually does deserve to die. And it will. The only question is what will replace it. I'll talk to you guys again real soon. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.